So let's talk about Vengeance. If I were to look at the game objectively as a whole, I would say that it's fine. It's the game that I played 3 years ago with more content added onto it, so why do I dislike it? I'll preface by saying that it's not really a bad game at all, far from it, but rather it's a very disappointing game for me. I purchased Vengeance specifically for the new Canon of Vengeance route and its story, which is what I'll be focusing on specifically here. And yes, there will be spoilers, and this is your warning. If you do not know, Shin Megami Tensei 5 is a game inspired by the creation myth, in which the creator, or God, created the heaven and the earth. God achieved this by ascending to the Empyrean throne, making a decree upon it in which there will be no gods before him. This decree stripped all of the other gods of their knowledge and reduced them to demons. This knowledge was then stored in the Garden of Eden until it was consumed by Eve and conferred to humans. Demons exist in this world to consume humans until they find their knowledge to become whole again in order to challenge God's rule. And of course, angels exist to prevent this and uphold God's order. The protagonist combines himself with a proto-fiend named Aogami, or Susanoo if you care to call him that, and becomes a being known as a Nahobino, one who possesses enough strength and knowledge to overthrow God, ascend the throne, and shape the world to their own vision. The Vengeance route seeks to highlight the inherent unjust nature of the Empyrean and attempts to dismantle it, which initially sounded redundant to me as I destroyed the throne in my initial playthrough anyway. However, the game attempts to deconstruct it by focusing the ideals meant to do so within two very specific characters, Tao and Yoko. Tao is not new, but she's very upbeat, optimistic, and wants the best for everyone. She is always willing to hear both sides to any given argument the game presents. However, Yoko is new, and she was designed specifically to be her exact opposite. She is a pessimist who has been wronged by the world in some way that the game will not explain, assumes the worst about everything, and only sees the world as the hell that it is. These characters do not develop beyond the archetypes given to them, and the story of the Empyrean throne in the Vengeance route rests solely on these two ideals. So if you're like me and you did not care for either of these characters, the story won't do much for you. However, I tend to dislike Yoko a lot more since her inclusion feels heavily forced, and the conflict in the other characters have to bend themselves for her sake. While it is a minor part of the complaints I had, the story doesn't really make any significant changes until the end of the second area, which is about 25 to 30 hours of gameplay time. Most people would have probably quit any other game long before that if its story took that long to get somewhere. There was quite a bit of effort put into the new scenes where Tao tries her best to appeal to her best friend Sahori at school in an attempt to pry her from the demon Lamu's manipulation. Like any demon, Lamu seeks to use her to become a Nahobino himself, to reach the throne as Sahori possesses his knowledge to do so. In the creation route, Sahori becomes too far gone to be saved. While Sahori is not a character who received enough screen time or development for anyone to really care about her, we know enough about her to know that she means a lot to Tao, and that's all that really matters. In the end, you will be the one to kill her, and you will be the one to deliver the bad news, which was enough to get an emotional response from me. The protagonist may be a demigod, but he's not perfect. He's still a high school student who just wants the best for his classmates, and ultimately he failed them. In the Vengeance route, they actually managed to kill Lamu early and save Sahori before it's too late, only for the Quadishtu to show up randomly and kill her for no reason in particular. I know that they were seeking out Magatsui, but I'm not interested in random shock value for that. And ultimately, despite all of these changes to the narrative, things are still the exact same. Tao still becomes the goddess to guide the protagonist after death, Sahori and Lamu are still both dead, albeit sooner, and the end goal of achieving the throne is still the exact same. The end result is less impactful as the Quadishtu hadn't had a large enough presence in the game for me to really care. At the moment, they were just outsiders in a game that I've already played. Yakumo makes for the Empyrean throne to destroy it alongside the eradication of demons and gods alike. Though after his partner Nua received the most lazy, off-screen death I've ever seen, he sort of gives up and goes back to the false Tokyo. I would have thought the opposite would have been true for this character, but I suppose I was wrong. Concerning what the Vengeance route was building up to, and how the Creation route treats this character towards the latter half of it, it just doesn't seem like a fitting end for him. Yuzuru seeks the throne in order to protect the people around him and his sister, who's suffering from a life-threatening condition. Despite the scene where the protagonist and Dazai try to lift his spirits and cheer him up from the insecurity he feels from being unable to protect his sister from being kidnapped twice, Dazai goes crazy and ends up having him killed anyway. Okay, tangent time. Look, Dazai has always been this huge mess of a character for me. He's this concerned but cowardly underdog who eventually becomes this overpowered son of a bitch and turns on everyone, though the process in which he gets there just doesn't make sense to me. His personality shift is about as sudden as a light switch, and his newfound powers come out of nowhere. In the Vengeance route, he does get his newfound strength from the Archangel Mastema, but seeing firsthand the type of lengths that these angels go to in order to defend God's vision should have at least made him question the validity of it, since he himself was turned to stone along with the other angels' victims. Instead, power is everything, and he decides that the only real justice is whatever God says and murders everyone who believes otherwise. They just kinda took a bad character and made him look worse. In the canon of creation, ordinarily Atsuta would combine with Koshimizu, the current Prime Minister of Japan, aka Tsukuyomi, to become a Nahabino himself and challenge you for the throne as one of the game's final bosses. It was a neat twist at the time. In the Vengeance route, since both Aogami and Atsuta die, Tsukuyomi has no choice but to combine with you, granting you a new Nahabino form. I was hoping this new form would give more implications for the game's lore and world building, as that kind of thing carries this game more than individual story beats or characters. Instead, we get what amounts to nothing but a new skin you get for replacing someone else. Of course, none of that matters anyway. After the fight against Tiamat, one of the endgame bosses, Aogami pulls a Deus Ex Machina and comes back to life, giving you your old form back so you can kill the dragon anyway. So, really, Atsuta died for nothing. Abdiel is a high-ranking archangel that leads the forces of Bethel against Lucifer, who killed God when the game starts. The word Abdiel itself originates from the Arabic word for slave, which is pretty appropriate. After all, what are angels but slaves to God? Anyway, she doesn't believe God to be dead, so she prolongs the war against demons to that end. In the canon of creation, during the Bethel Summit meeting with the other branch representatives, Abdiel attempts to convince the others of Bethel's noble cause. Unfortunately, the constant regurgitation of the empty words of her now dead god fall on deaf ears, as they are more interested in the vacant throne and the Nahobino that walk among them. As such, Abdiel challenges the protagonist to a duel, invoking God's laws upon him to prove her point, only to be soundly defeated and her reality shattered. God is dead. This event leads Abdiel to seeking out Dazai, who possesses her knowledge, allowing her to become a Nahobino herself. The irony here is that, of course, that she is willing to do anything to protect God's order, even if it means violating her oath to his will, becoming the very thing that she sought to destroy, realized as a fallen angel. The canon of Vengeance just skips over this development entirely. Dazai and Abdiel are done away with in a single boss fight before entering the Empyrean, like they didn't even matter. It was honestly pretty embarrassing. I dislike many of these changes because they feel pointless. Why use these new scenes to build up Yakumo's resolve for the throne if he was just gonna back down at the most minor of inconveniences? Why bother trying to build a scene where they maybe hope for Sahori if they were just gonna kill her off regardless? With that said, why do they even bring Lamu back at all? Why kill off Atsuta and bother with this new Tsukuyomi form if it literally means nothing? This is rhetorical, of course. I understand why. They simply wanted Yoko and Tao to be the only ones left by the time you reach the throne, and have their ideals clash above everything else, but the appeal of the story was just lost on me without any real payoff at this point, and I eventually stopped caring. I could talk about the gameplay changes, but they don't amount to much in my opinion. I could talk about how the game's damage scaling is no longer based on level differences, though unless you're a speedrunner or someone who's going to spend thousands of hours theory crafting builds, that doesn't really matter to you. And unless you're someone who's online all the time following other content creators, this isn't something that anyone would really notice or care about. There are new demons, but the only ones that matter are the ones that are obtained in the late game. The fact that there are still demons as DLC, or DLC at all, in a game that Atlas has released twice now, is also very dirty in my mind. It's been about 3 years, and Vengeance should simply be a complete package at this point. The Kodishu are all very cool and visually appealing, but they die midway through the game and stop mattering once Tiamat is summoned. The Demon Compendium is ordered the exact same way as last time, so my strategies didn't change very much the second time around. There's nothing inherently wrong with getting more dialogue out of the characters and more opportunities to interact with them, though these characters do not grow beyond the archetypes given to them, so the Vengeance route takes far too much time to inform me of things that I already knew. Overall, the gameplay itself has been refined and the quality of life is there. I just look back on the writing of the Vengeance route and ask myself why they even bothered. That's pretty much all I have on this game. I don't think it's bad, but again, it's just disappointing for me personally. I can easily recommend it to someone who hasn't played it, though if you've played it already, there's just not much for you outside of just improved performance, which for someone like me matters very little in a turn-based game, and performance isn't making the story better. I was hoping for a game similar to Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, admittedly. A game with a completely different goal in mind instead of what is effectively just New Game Plus with extra steps with a story that doesn't respect the time I put in. Anyways, give the video a like, subscribe, and Give me your thoughts in the comments as well. Perhaps my interpretation of the events in Vengeance are off, and I am very much willing to listen. And finally, be safe, be kind, and be well.